Hello, and welcome to the Book Tapestry. When we think of Dracula, what is the first image that flashes across your mind? Is it the long, pale fangs glistening in the moonlight? Is it the thick mist creeping across the desolate moors, or perhaps the frantic drive of a wooden stake through a beating heart? We've been conditioned to look for the horror in the shadows, in the supernatural. But what if I told you that the most terrifying object in Bram Stoker's masterpiece isn't a coffin, a crucifix, or even the Count himself? What if the true instrument of destruction is actually a filing cabinet? I'm Sophia Wordsmith, and this is Episode 8. Today, we're going to talk about a great classic horror, Dracula, but through an ethical lens. We're moving past the capes and the bats to look at the cold, hard logic underneath the legend. We are opening the Archive of Eradication. We're exploring how this novel isn't just a gothic ghost story, but a chilling case study in how modern systems authorize violence without the need for passion or cruelty. We're talking about a world where horror is processed. To understand this, we have to talk about Lucy Westenra. You might remember her as the vibrant, beautiful socialite who had 3 men proposing to her in a single day. She's the novel's light Mina's best friend, full of life and Victorian charm. But in the eyes of the experts, Lucy becomes something else, a problem to be solved. Traditionally, we're taught to see her purging as a necessary supernatural victory. But when you look closer at the mechanics of the text, her death marks a precise, cold moment where medical expertise and bureaucratic coordination converge to sanctify coercion. She isn't just killed, she is edited out of existence to keep the file clean. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the administrative voice of the novel, the journals, the telegrams, and the transcripts that create a tone of procedural objectivity. By the end of this hour, you'll see that Lucy didn't die because the men around her were immoral. She died because the system they built, a proto-bureaucracy of experts, left no ethical space in which she could actually exist. This is Dracula as you've never heard it before, a story where the paperwork is deadlier than the bite. To truly understand how this system operates, we have to look at what I call the medicalization of the stake. In the world of Dracula, the act of killing Lucy Westenra is never actually narrated as a murder. It's not even described as an execution. Instead, the text frames it as a clinical intervention, a high-stakes surgical procedure where the language remains strikingly, almost chillingly, procedural. When we read these scenes, the focus isn't on the emotional or spiritual weight of taking a life, it is squarely on the instruments, the positioning, and the sequence of events. Notice how Van Helsing takes charge. He doesn't pray, he directs. Arthur Holmwood, Lucy's fiancé, doesn't kill her, he performs the task. The others don't mourn, they attend. This isn't a chaotic struggle between good and evil. It's a managed corporate ritual where pain is reduced to a mere metric of efficacy. When Lucy's body convulses and she cries out in what any witness would call agony, the men in the room don't see human suffering. Through their professionalized lens, they see biological signs that the procedure is working. This is the essence of clinical cruelty, harm that is administered with a calm, expert hand, because it has been linguistically reclassified as care. By translating raw violence into technical technique, the narrative effectively deletes the ethical category of murder and replaces it with the technical category of necessary intervention. The horror here isn't the stake, it's the lack of hesitation. Once a death is framed as a medical obligation, as something that must be done for the health of the collective, any refusal to participate is no longer seen as a moral stand, it's rebranded as a failure of duty, or worse, as medical irresponsibility. The men are shielded from the psychological impact of their actions because they aren't acting as individuals, they are acting as practitioners. They are following a protocol that was written long before they entered that tomb. In this environment, the soul of the victim is secondary to the success of the operation. By the time the stake is driven home, the administrative work has already been completed. Lucy has been diagnosed, categorized, and cleared for disposal. The violence is merely the final line item on a very long, very professional checklist. To see the full scope of this administrative horror, we have to look deeper than the skin. We have to look into the very veins of the characters. This is where we apply our ethical lens to the 4 blood transfusions administered to Lucy Westenra. On the surface, these are framed as desperate, chivalrous attempts to save a dying woman, but in the logic of the archive, their function is actually juridical. These are not merely medical procedures, they are acts of establishing a legal and moral claim. Each transfusion effectively converts Lucy's body from a private, sovereign person into a communal asset managed by a board of male authorities. It is important to remember the historical context here. At the time Stoker was writing, there was no concept of blood type requirements. In a modern medical sense, these transfusions were essentially a hematological lottery, a dangerous, unscientific gamble. But that lack of medical precision only proves that the goal wasn't biological, it was social. The men's blood becomes the capital or proof of their investment. As Arthur, Seward, Quincy, and Van Helsing pump their blood into her, they aren't just performing a kindness, they are entering into a ritual of masculine bonding where Lucy is the medium, not the beneficiary. This collective sacrifice creates a sense of collective entitlement. By the time the group has done everything possible and invested themselves biologically into her system, a shift occurs in the ledger. Lucy no longer belongs to herself. She belongs to the system that sustained her. This creates what I call moral credit, which serves as an advanced form of insulation for the violence that eventually follows. Because the men have literally bled for her, they acquire the ethical leverage to decide when she must die. The logic is as cold as a bank statement. We gave her our life, so we now have the authority to manage her death. The transfusions don't actually save her life in the long run. Instead, they legitimate her destruction. They ensure that the groundwork of innocence is laid long before the stake is even carved. When the time comes to strike, the men don't feel like murderers. They feel like creditors closing an account. They have bought the moral right to kill her through the language of medical emergency and shared sacrifice. In this light, the transfusion isn't a gift, it's a contract signed in blood that Lucy never had the chance to read. By the time the procedure is finished, her body has been physically and legally prepared for its own eradication, all under the guise of the highest form of care. How does a group of good men, the supposed pinnacle of Victorian moral excellence, commit such visceral acts of violence without feeling the crushing weight of guilt? They don't do it through cold-blooded malice, they do it through a sophisticated psychological and systemic process I call the laundromat of the soul. This is a 5-step cycle of moral laundering that takes the dirt of raw violence and scrubs it until it looks like a civic virtue. The first stage is translation. This is a linguistic magic trick where the act is reframed from a personal violation into a necessary social function. Viewed through our ethical lens, we see that Lucy isn't a woman being killed in a dark tomb, she is a pathological condition being corrected for the greater good of London. When you change the noun from human to threat, you fundamentally change the morality of the verb used against her. Second is distribution. In the administrative world of Dracula, guilt is fragmented across multiple actors so that no single person has to carry the whole weight. One man holds the stake, another swings the hammer, another keeps watch, and another, the bureaucrat of the group, records the time of death in a journal. Because the act is broken into small professional tasks, no one owns the killing. No one feels the blood on their hands because everyone was just doing their part. This leads directly into substitution, where procedural correctness replaces individual conscience. The terrifying question for these men is never, "Is this right?" but rather, "Is this the correct next step in the protocol?" If the paperwork is in order and the experts agree, the conscience is silenced by the process. Next is justification, where the eventual success of the mission is used to retroactively cleanse the means. Because the vampire is gone and the status quo is restored, the violence is rendered beyond reproach. Success, in this system, is the ultimate apology. Finally, we have bleaching. This is the most insidious stage. It is where the residue of trauma is overwritten by images of domestic peace, the marriage of the survivors, and the eventual birth of a child. By the time this cycle is complete, violence has entered the system as a dark necessity and exited as a sanitized, heroic victory. The laundromat has done its job, the blood is gone, the records are clean, and the men remain good. They haven't just killed a monster, they have successfully managed a crisis, and the archive reflects only their triumph, never their cruelty. If Lucy Westenra is the victim of this administrative machine, then Mina Harker is undoubtedly its most essential architect. To see her clearly through our ethical lens, we have to look past the Victorian damsel in distress trope and recognize her for what she truly is, the intelligence officer of the Empire. Mina is the one who makes the chaotic, supernatural world legible so that the men can act upon it with surgical precision. Her labor is purely epistemic, a term we use to describe the gathering and structuring of knowledge. She is the one transcribing fragmented journals, synchronizing scattered telegrams, and archiving phonograph transcripts into a coherent, actionable record. Without her administrative genius, the men would be stumbling in the dark. She provides the map that allows the stake to find its target. However, we must notice the rigid, invisible boundary the system places around her. Mina is frequently complimented for having a man's brain, but this intellectual inclusion comes with a catch. She is permitted to use that brain only so long as it remains a tool for the collective, never translating into personal sovereignty. She enables the machine, but she is never allowed to drive it. In fact, when we compare her survival to Lucy's death, we see that it isn't an ethical victory of her purity, it is a logistical victory of her utility. Mina is saved because she remains a manageable asset, while Lucy became an unmanageable risk, a wild, desiring force that the system could not categorize or contain. Mina remains productive even under the threat of vampirism. When she is infected by Dracula, the men don't treat her with the same frantic, holy dread they showed Lucy. Instead, they treat her symptoms as a stream of incoming data. Her forehead scar, burned there by a sacred wafer, functions as a status bar that the men read to monitor the progress of their mission. Mina doesn't escape the machine, she perfects it. She provides the human heart that reassures the men they are still the good guys, all while her fingers never stop typing the very documents that authorize their violence. She is the living proof that in the world of the archive, your value is determined by your documentation. In the end, Mina isn't the hero who defeats the monster. She is the lead administrator who ensures the monster is properly filed away before its final liquidation. She demonstrates that the most effective way to survive a predatory system is to make yourself indispensable to its paperwork. The final horror of Dracula isn't that the monster dies, but that the system emerges entirely cleansed. We see this most clearly in the novel's ending, the birth of Quincy Harker. To the casual reader, this child is a symbol of hope and renewal. But through our lens, he is something much more clinical. He is a receipt. His very existence, and the fact that he is named after the entire male coalition, serves as a biological certification that the methods used were sound. No further ethical accounting is required. In the world of the archive, the future stands as proof that the past needs no apology. Lucy Westenra was not destroyed by malice, hatred, or even the Count's bite alone. She was destroyed by a system that knew exactly how to wash its hands using the language of expertise. Her death was processed through the combined machinery of medicine, empire, and the archive, until it ceased to register as a murder at all. Stoker's novel serves as a warning. When violence is routed through protocol and professional consensus, individual conscience becomes a luxury that the system can no longer afford. It creates a world where doing it by the book becomes a total substitute for moral reflection. As we close the file on this episode, I want you to think about the administrative graves in our own modern world. Think about the places where harm is justified daily as best practice, standard operating procedure, or policy necessity. Dracula doesn't just imagine a world of supernatural monsters, it imagines a world perfected by administration, a world where success itself becomes the ultimate moral argument. Lucy was filed away so efficiently, so correctly, and so professionally that she was effectively forgotten before she was even buried. She became a closed case in a pristine filing cabinet. And that, perhaps, is the true ghost that haunts the archive, the memory of those who were erased not by evil, but by the correct next step. I'm Sophia Wordsmith. Thank you for joining me for episode 8. Until next time, keep looking at the stories, but always through a better lens. Thank you for listening to The Book Tapestry. If you found this helpful, please share it with a friend who prefers listening over reading. See you next time.